Welcome, Pokemon player, to another episode of Discount Pokemon Decks. In today's episode, we're going to go over the different variations of the Wailord Mill Deck. If you haven't, check out the other video, the Wailord Whimsy, which has a breakdown of that deck and a couple of games to play with it, so you can kind of get a good idea. Of the four decks, that I think the Wailord Whimsy is the strongest one. So we're going to go check out the other three decks. And I think this gives a good idea of the evolution of deck ideas, because the Wailord Whimsy wasn't the first deck. The first deck was the Wailord deck. Alright, so let's take a look at this. Oops. Get it full screen. So the Wailord Whimsy, the original Wailord deck still had the idea of Whimsicott and Wailord, kind of a, four Wailords, two Whimsicott to kind of heal. So it had that synergy, but it also had an Octillery in there because I was scared that we wouldn't get enough draw. So I had an Octillery in there, obviously, but it also has another difference. The big difference here is these three cards here. So we have a lot of energy for a mill deck, 7 energy, but instead of using Float Stones and Rough Seas, we used Floral Crown. And Floral Crown heals 20 damage, it's a tool, heals 20 damage per turn. So it's kind of where the idea came from. I saw this card in Generations, and I said, wow, it's kind of interesting. How can I use it for? And I actually tried it in a few decks with Poison, because 20 damage is what you'd get with a regular poison attack or poison Pokemon. So you could poison your Pokemon, and in theory he would be healed by the time it got back to your turn. So that was the kind of idea of this. But I decided to use it with the Wailord, but then also I realized that I needed to switch him out, and I didn't want to rely on switches, ropes, and stuff like that. So why not use Fairy Garden? And Fairy Garden lets any Pokemon with Fairy Energy retreat. So you see I had Fairy Energy, so I can use the Fairy Energy on the Wailord-EX. I can use it on the Whimsicott for a damage attack. So it's pretty, there's some synergies there going on. So between, as long as I have one energy on the Wailord, there's another synergy with this, that the attaching an energy to a Wailord activates the ability to remove all special conditions, but it's kind of not needed if you think about it, because you can always retreat a whale for another one. So if you retreat, the special condition goes away anyway. So, in that sense, it was okay. The problem with this deck is that it just wasn't as strong. Why use a Floral Crown when you can use Rough Seas and heal 30 damage for turn? So if you think about it, you're giving your opponent 10 extra damage per turn. So if your Wailord stays on the bench for 2 or 3 turns, it starts to add up. And that means the damage he needs to produce to knock it out is going to be lower. And obviously you want to maximize that. Wailord is a water type, and water type can use Rough Seas. So, why go through all this? In the current standard right now, as I'm recording this video, there isn't a lot of tool removal, so I don't have to worry about someone removing a float stone easily anyway. So that was this deck. There is a cards in opposition, and one of the cards in opposition is here, Max Potion. If you use Max Potion, you see I only have one in this version of the deck. If you use Max Potion, you get rid of all the energy. Well, now you got to put another energy down. So it was a little more clunky, and I decided, not to go with it. So what I did actually for the next version is I went to the bunny version. All right, this is called the bunny version, Wailord Bunny. And of course you're going to recognize I replaced the Whimsicott with the bunnelby, because I thought, all right, I've got a mill deck and I'm not actually getting rid of their cards very much. What if they just stand around and do nothing? Which is totally possible. You usually don't get that often against the mill deck, because people want to knock it out, right? They see, they're programmed. I've got my deck. I generate this much attack, and I'm going to use my Ultra Ball. I'm going to use my Sycamore, and I'm going to do that. So they're kind of behind you as it is. So as you can see, I don't have any of those cards here. Nothing that's really going to discard other cards. So I try to stay ahead of them. And again, it features the Floral Floral Crown, which is hard to say. It's almost a tongue twister. Floral Crown, and the Fairy Garden. But the problem with this deck is you're doing a mill deck and you're facing someone that's doing lots of damage. So what they end up doing is Lysandering, and they'll Lysander your bunnelby, or they'll attack it when it's up there and in the active position, and you know you're giving them cards. So again, 2 bunnelbys and an Octillery. Well, now we're close. You knock out one a Wailord or 2, and the game's over. So 2 bunnelbys and 2 Wailords, the game's over. And the Wailords do get knocked out from time to time. That's one of the parts of the game, obviously, is you have 4 of them, so hopefully you get enough, and eventually they may get knocked out. They may get Lysandered if they're on the bench and you're waiting to heal. But so in any case, so this was progression number 2. I tried bunnelby. I thought maybe if I could do a little milling it would work out, and it really didn't. So I'm going to go to deck number 3. In this was the Wailord with no energy. And what I did here, actually I believe this was 4. I believe I went to Whimsy with the float stones and all that. And then I went to this deck. And you see this deck, I got rid of the Whimsicott. Figured I don't need it, there's no point, it gets knocked out anyway. And I kept the Octillery. And you see the float stones are here now, the Rough Seas, 4 Max Potions, there's definitely this looks a lot more like the other one, except basically Whimsicott, Octillery, and Remoraid's there. There's no energy at all in this deck. But the problem is that I noticed that you don't really need Octillery. I didn't really need to draw cards. I mean, I'm not playing a lot of cards, unless I'm doing energy removal or I'm trying to get my Wailord out. I have enough drawing power to do that. And I kind of had Judge. So again, we're talking about cards in oppositions or cards that hurt you. Well, if I'm playing Judge and Octillery, it's usually a good combo, right? Because Judge will make you draw 4 cards, and then you could pick up the 5th with Octillery, or if you play a few, you get a few cards out of that, while you reduce your opponent's hand to 4 if they have more cards in that. But the problem is in a mill deck, you kind of don't want to reduce their hand, right? That helps them because you're putting those cards back in their deck. So again, that's kind of, mill decks and Judges are kind of in opposition a little bit. N's a different story because as long as you have, as long as he has all his prize cards, he's drawing 6. So that's usually a good amount, and actually you can use that for your advantage. For a Judge to use it to your advantage, you'd have to have 1, 2, or 3 cards. Otherwise, you're not really doing anything there. So, but I kind of realized in the end, the Octillery didn't do much because you're not playing a lot of cards. And so I don't, once I have 5 cards in my hand, Octillery becomes useless. He becomes almost a pawn, again, to get knocked out. So, I scrapped that and went to the Whimsy deck, and that's the deck you see here. So you kind of get an idea of the evolution of a deck. I had an idea, okay, let's have Wailord and Whimsicott, that's good. Wailord can take a lot of damage, so maybe I could use Whimsicott to transfer that damage back and heal him. And, the idea of retreating and healing, it's just how you do it sometimes. And you could see this deck works a lot better in Synergy. I'm only using the Max Potion on the Wailords and not putting any energy on. I don't need my Stadium to retreat. I do need it to heal, and I have 4 of them, so that's okay. And it's going to heal 30, so I'm going to do a little bit more. But this is basically the evolution of a deck, trial and error, see what works. And it's good, a lot of times I will keep track. I will take my deck and I will keep track of it in an Excel sheet and see which one does better, and use that as a tool to figure out, hey, which one's better or worse? So I'll play 4 games, and I'll even note, I'm not going to cheat myself, because if I get a insta win, somebody that quits right away, or someone that just had a deck you can obviously tell they weren't playing out or wasn't up to snuff, I'll note that in my notes. Or if it's a tier 1 deck, a tier 2 deck, a deck that's very strong, I'll note that as well, because, hey, I don't want to fool myself in thinking, oh yeah, this is the best one, where, padding the stats for one deck or another. I should be independent of that. I want to play the best deck every time, so that's the idea. But in any case, I hope you enjoyed this. I'm going to have all the deck lists in the description of the YouTube video, so you can check it out. And again, you can always check out the other Wailord video to see how mill decks work. And how the Wailord Mill Deck works, and you can figure out for yourself which one you like. And if you don't like the build I use, you can always tweak it as well. So for Discount Pokemon Decks, thanks, and I'll see you at the next episode.